Alrighty, welcome everybody. This is part 3 of epithelial tissues, where we are finally getting down to business and going to look at the structure and function of selected epithelial tissues. So there are more epithelial tissues than we're going to discuss, but we're going to touch on the most common ones. We're going to start off with simple squamous. And if you think about our previous slide or video show, simple refers to a single layer of cells, and squamous refers to the fact that those cells are thin and flat. You can see that over here in the diagram where the epithelial cells are shown in this beige color. You're looking at them from the side, so they're kind of shown in profile, right? This right here is the free or the apical surface, right? This down here, this is the basement membrane on the basal surface, and this is the tissue that it covers, right? Simple squamous tissue is the thinnest, most permeable epithelial tissue. Because of its thinness, its molecules can pass across it in one direction or another very rapidly. It's quick and easy to get through. But remember, it's a low volume cell. Low volume means that it's low activity. And so it is used in places in the body where substances need to move from one space to another space very quickly, but through the process of diffusion or filtration. Because remember, diffusion and filtration are passive, and they require no cellular energy. And if the cell can be low volume because things are moving through it through passive means, and by making the cell thin, you make things really easy to get through, right? Some key examples of where we find this would be the lungs, right? Where you want oxygen to rapidly diffuse across the simple squamous into blood, and the CO2 to rapidly diffuse across it out of blood. This is found in the microscopic blood vessels known as capillaries, where materials actually move in and out of blood. So you have lots of big arteries and veins, but they're just like pipes that carry blood to different places in the body. It's only in these microscopically small blood vessels where materials kind of are exchanged between blood and the surrounding tissues. It's also found in the kidneys, right? Again, a place where you want materials to pass quickly out of blood into the kidneys so the kidneys can process those materials into urine, right? It's also found in these structures known as serous membranes, which cover many of our visceral organs, like our abdominal organs and our lungs and our heart. And in some cases, simple squamous gets a special name. When simple squamous is part of a serous membrane, then it's called mesothelium. So the word mesothelium just refers to the simple squamous of a serous membrane, and we'll discuss those in the second half of the semester. Or the simple squamous that lines blood vessels is called endothelium, and blood vessels in your heart, right, is called endothelium. And I'm going to make a little Valentine for heart. So, and we'll discuss that in the second half of the semester. But endothelium and mesothelium is simply simple squamous tissue in a specific context. The next tissue we're going to talk about is called simple cuboidal. The word simple refers to a single layer. Cuboidal refers to the fact that the cells are cube-shaped, right? Or they're evenly proportioned, equally high and wide. You can see them here in beige where they are lining these tubes, and you can see while they're not perfectly uniform, the cells are the cells are about as wide as they are tall. Sometimes they're more rounded than actually cube-shaped, but you're looking for an evenly proportioned cell. Now, because it's just a single layer, it is thin enough to be easily permeable, right? In other words, it's easy for something to go from this lumen and pass through the epithelium into the tissue beyond. But because the cells are larger and they have more volume, they can be active. In other words, they can make lots of ATP, and they can make lots of transport proteins, right? And they can make lots of proteins for release, right? And so they are involved with absorption, right? Either the active movement, they'll uptake something in the lumen and actively pass it through using things like transport proteins or endo and exocytosis, okay? Likewise, secretion is the active release of a cellular product. And this also involves the cell needing to be active and capable of performing work because it needs to produce a product and then it needs to release it using proteins or exocytosis. Some key examples where you find this is in the tubules of the kidney, where it is used in the urine making process. The next tissue is simple columnar. Again, simple refers to a single layer. Columnar refers to the fact that the cells are tall and thin. And you can see that here in beige on the side of the screen. Everything between these two lines and those two lines are simple columnar. What you can see is that the cells are tall and thin, or long and narrow, depending on how you want to look at it, right? And so by being a single, because it's a simple epithelium, right? Because it's simple epithelium, it's thin enough to be easily passed through. But like simple cuboidal, the cells are big enough to be active. And so from a functional standpoint, simple columnar and simple cuboidal basically function the same, right? Now, sometimes in simple columnar, there are these special cells that release a protein-based material known as mucin, and when mucin mixes with water, it makes mucus, and these are called goblet cells. So we have a goblet cell there, a goblet cell there, there, and there. And they release this material into the lumen that they line, right? And sometimes this mucus, well, usually this mucus in some form or fashion is protective. A great example of where this is found is in the intestines or the stomach, right? Where the cells need to actively produce protein enzymes for digestion, and they need to be able to transport nutrients from the lumen of the intestine into nearby vessels and release materials to assist in the digestive process. The next tissue is known as pseudostratified ciliated columnar. The word stratified, as I mentioned in a previous video, means layered. The word pseudo means false. And so this tissue looks like it's layered, but it's not. The reason for that, if you look at this image, is that there are some cells that don't reach all the way to the top. For example, that cell, right, all the cells are in contact with the basement membrane, but this cell, for example, doesn't reach the apical surface, right? You might have, this one only shows one, and some of the cells are kind of irregularly shaped, so some nuclei are up high near the apical surface, other nuclei are down low near the basal surface, and that kind of gives the viewer the impression that this tissue is made of multiple layers of cells. But as you can see, there's never more. It only takes one cell to go from the basal surface to the apical surface. When this tissue can also have goblet cells in it. And I'm going to kind of introduce the example of where this is found earlier, because where this is found relates to the function it carries out. The classic example of where this is it's in your respiratory tract. It's in your nasal cavity, portions of your pharynx, the portions of your larynx, the trachea, and your bronchi. And what happens is the goblet cells release mucus, which onto the surface of the cells, and the mucus, among other things, traps microscopic particles of dust and bacteria and other potentially harmful things, and traps it, filtering the air that you inhale. And then on the apical surface of this tissue, there are these little hair-like extensions known as cilia. And the cilia actually sweep. They actually move. And what they do is they sweep the dirty mucus kind of the same way a broom would sweep away dirt. And it helps the dirty mucus helps it not accumulate in your respiratory passageways. It actually sweeps it towards your esophagus, where you unknowingly swallow about a pint of dirty mucus a day. Yeah. And then the last tissue we're going to look at this point, is called stratified squamous. Now, this is a truly layered tissue. It is stratified. So if we look at the image, there's the basal surface. Here's the apical surface. And what you can see is there are many, many layers of cells between the apical surface and the basal surface. Right? Now, you'll notice that the cells near the basal surface are round or maybe even vaguely cuboid in shape. But as you get closer and closer to the surface, the cells flatten out and become thin and flattened. They become squamous-like. And so stratified tissues are typically named after the shape of their apical cells. And because the cells on the apical layers are squamous, this is called stratified squamous. Stratified squamous tissue creates a thick layer, and it's a thick layer that is difficult to pass through. It has low permeability. And the thickness of this tissue also makes it very protective. And so this is used in parts of the body that are subject to a lot of abrasion or wear and tear, such as the surface of your skin, where it protects the underlying tissue and makes kind of a relatively impermeable barrier, preventing water loss or pathogens from getting in. It's also found in internal body structures, such as the oral cavity, the anal canal, the vaginal canal, your esophagus, and your pharynx. All right. We're going to go ahead and stop there. We just have one more slideshow on the epithelial tissue, and it's basically just to wrap up some odds and ends. We will talk about glands, cell junctions, cilia, and microvilli. Why don't you join me then? It'll be awesome.